Right. Today we have Thomasina Williams with us. I said your name right properly, yes?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good, good, good. And how about I just let you introduce yourself a little bit about what you do, and then we'll get into things.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Meredith, for inviting me to share with your listening audience. I
Absolutely.
am Thomasina Williams. I'm the founder of Sankofa Legacy Advisors, and I'm creating a community for women that I call the FEW. It's an acronym which stands for Family Enterprise Women. And what I do is essentially help families develop leaders who are going to sustain both the family's financial wealth and the family well-being. It's that latter part, the focus on the family, that oftentimes gets overlooked and that I refer to as the missing piece of the puzzle. So that's why we focus on that. I like to remind people that had it not been for some kind of investment in human capital, in the first instance, there would be no financial capital.
Mhm.
Yet, once we accumulate a certain level of wealth, oftentimes people tend to not focus as intently on continuing to develop that human capital.
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting point. I can see why you say that.
Mhm.
Um, have you seen that in action?
Seeing people actually doing the opposite and being intentional about investing in
Yeah,
the
and then
family
sort
side,
of letting the rest
absolutely.
slide. Yeah,
Well, not that we let it slide. I think it needs to be a both and,
yeah.
not an either or, but a both and. Over time, I think if people think about their practical experience as well as research shows that over time, the family is going to get larger and larger and larger. So you have more people off of this same wealth. And the family needs to be intentional about carrying forward both the legacy, the values of the family, a certain entrepreneurial spirit to maintain that which you have. It's
Mhm.
interesting how, we get to a certain level and sometimes want to kind of rest on our laurels, assuming it's always going to be here. I think one of the myths in this field is that I can have all of these fabulous, fantastic, well-producing wealth strategies, and I can have a set of trust, I can have a set of limited liability companies, all kinds of legal structures, and we think somehow now our work is done and everything is going to move forward as we ideally designed it. And unfortunately, life just doesn't happen that way. It really is the human element that determines the success of all of that.
Well, that is why I'm so excited that you're here today because, yes, I sort of handle that first part that you're talking about with clients, but I do
Mhm.
see that there's a desire and a need for that second piece, which is why you're here to talk about that today. So thank you.
Thank
Can you
you.
tell me a little bit about how you got started in doing this work?
Yes. In two words, it was divine intervention. I
Mm.
really believe that I was led to this work because of my own family's history. My family's wealth was unfortunately lost in my mom's generation. And for me, the most devastating part is that it fractured family relationships.
Oh boy.
My
Yeah.
grandparents died literally more than 40 years ago. We're now in the fifth generation, and some of that is still reverberating throughout my family. And so I really believe I was led to this work so that I could learn how to, frankly, help heal my own family and am just really passionate about families. Once I realized that, oh my gosh, you mean it wasn't just my family? Like this is a thing that happens to families, not
Right.
just in the US, but around the globe. I learned about the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in three generations proverb. And that was such an epiphany for me that it sent me kind of on a journey. And I realized that there was an emerging field of professionals who had come from different disciplines who were trying to figure out how do we avoid that for families, or as in the case of my family's fate, how do we course correct in subsequent generations?
Mhm.
And families are the bedrock of our society. Family businesses and the contributions that families who own shared assets make to our economy is phenomenal. Oftentimes, family businesses in particular get, I think, a bad rap, and there's an assumption that they're mostly, quote, mom and pops. But the data the research shows that family businesses actually account for almost 60% of private sector jobs in the US. And a
Really?
full, yes,
Wow.
60%, and 54% of GDP. So family businesses are the cornerstone of our economy as well. And
Absolutely.
what better way to be of service, not only to figuring out how to help my own family, but also how to be of service to other families who are making that kind of contribution. So I decided to go all in. It became my personal passion, professional mission. Actually, my third career. I spent almost 20 years practicing law in Miami. And then I worked in philanthropy for 6 years at the Ford Foundation in New York before discovering this work and falling in love with it.
Oh, wow. That does sound sort of serendipitous then.
Divine
Um,
intervention.
so I'm familiar with the term, but in case not everyone is, when you say shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve, can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves is a proverb which says that, at least historically, the way that families built wealth was someone either literally or metaphorically rolled up their shirt sleeves and got to work creating a business, a family business, and did very well. Second generation grows up, has a very comfortable lifestyle. If the family is not very intentional in talking about its history, how it got to where it is, and teaching the third generation, more importantly, what it was required to keep it, to
Mhm.
build it, to grow it as the family grows rather, then by the end of the third generation, the family is back to shirt sleeves again. And that, again, was just such a huge light bulb for me, because it turns out that there's some variation of that proverb in literally every part of every part of the globe,
Oh,
and
is that
family
right?
businesses across the globe. Oh, yes. So there's a
Wow.
clogs to clogs, rice paddy to rice paddy. I saw once that they say, allegedly in Saudi Arabia, that grandfather rode a camel,
Huh?
dad ends up driving a Ferrari, and then grandson is back to the camel. Again, it's just a metaphor
Same idea,
for
yeah.
the need to be very purposeful. Actually, the tagline for my firm is that we need to invest in our families like we invest in our businesses, and be just as intentional, just as purposeful.
Yeah, yeah. Now speaking of families, you mentioned family business. I'm
Mhm.
curious, especially because a lot of my clients are in tech, so their background in
Mhm.
terms of how they acquire their wealth is a little bit different. Do you work only with families who have family businesses, or that's just sort of one of the areas that you, with whom you work?
Family business is just one of the sectors. I have a personal passion for that, because that's how my family made its money, and then unfortunately ended up losing it. But the way that I think about this is, I think about the term business rather broadly speaking. The key when it
Mm.
comes to family is that there is a shared asset that needs to be jointly managed. So if you
Ah,
think about your clients who made their fortunes in tech, executives who have stock options, you think about, for example, athletes, entertainers,
mhm.
they are essentially a business unto themselves
Right.
as it relates to the family then benefiting from that. And they
Yep.
may have created all kinds of trust. They may have a family foundation, other ways in which the family needs to make shared decisions, a vacation property. The
Mhm.
key is, for ensuring the family's legacy, is to help the family be able to make those decisions, particularly when there's a difference of opinion about what they should do.
Well, I'm definitely going to get to you to, I'm going to follow up on that last point with you in a little bit. But I did want to ask you also in terms of um, qualifications, certifications, are there any, do they exist? Do you have them in terms of the work that you do, the field you work in?
Qualifications for the clients or for the
For you. So
advisors?
you, and in terms, I'm asking from like an educational standpoint, are there any certifications or anything that, I don't know, that qualifies a person to do this kind of work?
Great question. That was the question I had when I discovered this area of work. Like, okay, I want to do this. I'm really interested in how do I do this? What is the training? Where is the degree program, the certificate? Honestly, there really isn't any particular training, which I find very disconcerting, particularly coming from law that is obviously regulated, where there are certain minimum requirements. Doesn't mean that you are necessarily a good lawyer, but we know at least everybody has gone to law school and had some basic training. We know that actually, I learned recently that not every state has continuing legal education. I happen to be barred in Florida. So even though I have not practiced law for, I don't know, probably 15 years at this point, I still am a member of the Florida Bar. I still keep my bar card current. I still do continuing legal education credits. Nothing like that exists in the arena of working with families on this side of the ledger. Now, obviously, for people like you who are managing financial assets, it's heavily regulated industry as it should be. I personally think that, quite candidly, it should be just as heavily regulated when we're talking about the family side. But unfortunately, today, no, there is no such training. What I did, I joked that I gave myself essentially an independent study PhD in how do you work with families, to the point that one of the organizations I'm a member of, it's called the Purposeful Planning Institute. It's a multidisciplinary group of professionals who work with families. I was asked in, probably must have been I think it was in 2020, actually. I remember doing it on Zoom to give a presentation about, like, how did you do this? Like, any training anybody told me about that suggested that I would learn how to work with families, I would understand family systems, how to be a coach, how to be a resource for families. I took it upon myself to do that, but there are no specific credentials per se.
So you basically sought out the information / skill set / resources to put it all together.
Yes. And I love the way you say that, put it all together, because that's how I think about working with families. It's like putting together the pieces of a puzzle.
Right.
The challenge becomes that we don't have the box that has the picture on it necessarily. Some of it is having to frankly just do trial and error and explore. But the way that I think about working with families, I've come up with this visual model that is essentially pieces of a puzzle to help people kind of think about in a different way, how do I simplify this complexity in a way to assure myself that, yes, I can do this. I will need professional guidance and support, but it's not something that's insurmountable. And it seems daunting to, frankly, families oftentimes. But if you have some kind of a roadmap, people have a pathway that they can follow, it can be obviously very reassuring.
Yeah, I can imagine that it could be overwhelming because there's a lot of things to address and to cover, and not easy stuff a lot of the times, I think.
The family stuff, the people part of anything. I mean, candidly, I say that the people part of any business is the toughest part.
Right.
And families that are most successful across generation after generation after generation really do create processes and structures where they talk about and treat the family itself. It's the business of family, independent of your financial assets. That includes, how do we keep this thing going? How do we pass on the family history? How do we pass on the family legacy, the family values? How do we prepare the next generation? A lot of focus on the next generation. We also need to think about, well, how do we think about and help the incumbent generation rather? How do we help them think about what is their next chapter? And how do we do this in a way that is systematized? If we're talking about shared family assets, how do we decide who benefits from which assets? Frankly, one of the places I like to start with families is just the simple question, not always an easy answer. Who is family?
Yeah. Right.
Now, you would think that should be, quote, an easy question. I did something recently. One of my clients started a program to teach people how to invest in the stock market. which I think is a fantastic idea. And I said that I would, make a donation to not-for-profit. And then she said, well, Thomasina, if you're going to donate this money, you can designate some scholarship money to particular people. I was like, really? Okay. So I decided to make the offer to my extended family. My immediate family has that under control, but I know there are a lot of people who don't in my extended family. And I created a little form that people had to complete because the criteria were, how are you related to either my maternal or my paternal grandparents? You can take this program, you just can't benefit from this particular scholarship pot. And people had to explain how they're related to the family. They also had to commit that they would share what they learned with one person. And someone applied, and her explanation of how she was related to my family is that she's one of my cousin's third husband's daughter.
Really?
Okay, that's fantastic. She is a part of the family for purposes of coming to family reunion, not for purposes of taking advantage of these scholarship funds. I've had that situation working with clients. A family, several branches, owned a very substantial business. One of the CEO's wife had a nephew that the CEO was just really close to this young man, really had great admiration for him. And the young man was able to come and work in the business. He had access to the family compound, used the plane, all of that. But there was quite a stir when the CEO let it be known to the rest of his family that he thought this young man was a candidate to one day be CEO of the company.
Right.
It was like, oh, wait a second, hold up. No. We love him. He can do just about anything else. He's got a job here. He's got the company car. He can use the plane, that. He cannot be CEO. He is not family for that purpose. So it's important for families to think about this issue of who is family. And some families, in-laws, people who marry into the family, can benefit the same way someone who was born into the family. In some families, they can't.
Right.
And having families take that kind of intentionality, be that purposeful in advance before there becomes a challenge, can really help to avoid differences, disputes, and conflicts that frankly can tear families apart.
I believe it. I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, and I'm sure you've probably heard this many times, but the show Succession.
Yes.
Right? Like, isn't that sort of the dramatic example of everything we're talking about right now?
Succession is a fictionalized, yes, in some cases exaggerated,
of course,
example of what happens.
Yes.
The challenge
very
that I find
exaggerated in many cases.
But the problem is, frankly, a lot of people believe those kind of shows, and particularly families of wealth. There are all kinds of stereotypes out there. People talking about entitlement and those kinds of things, which really make it difficult. It's difficult for people who don't have this level of wealth to understand the challenges that come with wealth, the burdens of wealth, as well as the benefits. And those kinds of stereotypes can make it very difficult for people to grapple with how to manage the wealth and also be parts of various communities that they want to be a part of, because people see them and see a stereotype of somebody they saw on a show and don't see them for who they are as an individual, because our society puts so much on money and wealth.
Right. Yeah. So speaking of all these families, can you talk a little bit more about the type of family client that you typically work with? Either describing like a generic client, or maybe there's a couple that fit just tell me a little bit more about the people with whom you work.
Great question. I get this question a lot, like, is there an income minimum, the way you would have if you were managing someone's assets? I I think about families the way that I think about the work. As I said, I was a lawyer for almost 2 decades. I did litigation, and I love that commercial litigation because it was all kinds of disputes about any and everything you can imagine. You know how litigious we are in this country.
Yeah.
And families are very unique. Families are very much the same. Every family is different in terms of the number of people maybe in the family, the level of wealth. Some have an operating business. I'm working with families that have family foundations. Sometimes they have a family office. There really is no one size fits all. And I don't think about the ideal client from the standpoint of the typical ideal client profiles. The thing that I'm most interested in is to what extent is the family willing to, frankly, do some things differently. If they didn't need to do some things differently, they probably wouldn't come to me. Usually people come to me when there's some sort of challenge, not necessarily conflict, but let's say, for example, they're thinking about generational transition, kind of how you and I first met.
Right.
Parents aren't quite sure, well, how do I do this thing? I don't know. And there's a lot of anxiety about it. I want to make sure that I do it correctly. I don't want to put too much of a burden on my children to have to figure all of this complexity out. You have those kinds of concerns. And sometimes, frankly, I just got off of a call before this conversation with a client who hired me to help her understand the trust that her lawyer drafted. It's like, well, you don't really need me. I mean, just, you paid this person, make them explain it.
Yeah.
But I find, you'd be surprised, very sophisticated people who have trust, they don't understand and they can't explain it to their children.
Oh boy. Wow.
So they have anxiety about things like that, as to reasons why there might be a challenge. So I want to be clear that challenge isn't always a conflict or hostility between the individuals. Although I have my share of those types of cases as well. And it's really about people's willingness to think about how can we do this differently, and being willing to recognize that relationships are co-created. If I change my behavior towards you, the way that I engage, it by definition changes the relationship. So I can't just say, oh, Meredith this, Meredith that. It's also on me to be a party to this. I have agency. And what I find that happens more often than not, people will come to me and want me to, quote, make somebody else do something differently. Can you just get my kids, Thomasina, to talk to each other?
Yeah.
Can you make them get along? It's not about me, it's those people over there. Which I just find fascinating, because it's always about us. As long as you're a part of the relationship, there is something that you can do differently. You know, one of the stereotypes, again, around wealthy people is the so-called entitled child. And I say to people, think about what you're saying there. No child is born into the world entitled. How did that child learn how to ride a bicycle? Somebody taught them. Right. Somebody taught them to read. Right. So we are all, to some extent, a product of our environments. No child becomes entitled unless the adults around that child facilitate that kind of behavior.
That's really powerful, what you just said.
Yes, absolutely. And so, but the other piece of this that I try to emphasize with people is there's no judgment, there's no blame. Yes. It's just human nature. Yeah. We are all in somewhat of a defense mode to protect ourselves. That manifests and looks different for different people. So a part of what I help families do is to think also big picture, meaning let's look at the family context and not simply focus on this one individual. You know, it's like, if somebody is looking at your background, they see that beautiful yellow flower over there, and they zoom in only on that flower, they would have no way of knowing there's a whole huge ocean back there.
Right.
And that is what we tend to do when it comes to relationships and particularly dealing with challenges within our families, we're focused like a laser on that yellow flower just over your right shoulder. No idea there's a whole big ocean there over the left shoulder.
Yes. Yeah.
And so seeing the big picture, the context, and how all of these relationships and pieces of the puzzle, again, fit together, just gives us a lot more information, more to work with, so that we have more understanding. We tell ourselves a different story about this yellow flower if we know that it's on a beach versus, just that yellow flower. We might think it's just, I don't know, on in a vase someplace, sitting on somebody's desk.
Right.
Having a bigger picture gives so much more information. That definitely applies to families.
Oh, I mean, it sounds, when you say it, it sounds so obvious and, very intuitive, but at the same time, I can see how having support and drawing conscious attention to that idea can be really helpful.
Yes, I came across a drawing on the internet, I don't know, a few years ago that I just loved. And it was a picture of like a mason jar with a lid. And there was a woman inside the jar with a label. And the little bubble quote was, "It's difficult to read the label from inside the jar."
Right.
Which is why things like coaches are so important. It's hard for us to see ourselves the way that others see us and understand the impact that we're having on other people. And that is, again, a large part of what I do when frankly, if a parent calls me and they're concerned about some challenge amongst their kids. Conversely, if an adult child calls me and wants to rant about their parents' behavior, we all have something we can do to make a difference in this situation. And more importantly, the only person we can control is ourselves. And that in and of itself is a challenge a lot of times.
Why do you say that?
Because it is. I mean, think about it. Let's say someone who enjoys chocolate chip cookies or Lay's potato chips. Their commercial was you can't have just one. Because that is kind of how we are as human beings. And when it comes to relationships, particularly with family members, because we are so close to them and there is such an emotional pull there, oftentimes when there is some level of discomfort, some conversation that we don't want to have, but know that we should have. Unconsciously, something may be going on. We may have a disagreement or want to do something differently. We don't know how to have that conversation. And we don't want to offend someone. We don't want to appear to be entitled or pushy. Example, our parents are getting up in age and we think they should be doing estate planning. We want to have that conversation. I had a client whose spouse had a health scare. We need to think about estate planning and what's going to happen. That's a tough conversation for a lot of people to have. You don't want to appear pushy. You don't want to appear intrusive. You don't want to appear as though you're entitled, that you think this is all about me. So those kinds of underlying concerns and anxieties are the kinds of things that can get in the way. And it can be difficult for someone to see what is going on. One of the things that I like to do is to help people understand their relationship system. I firmly believe that relationships drive everything. Our relationships with ourselves, with the higher power, if we believe in a higher power, with each other, with money. All of those are very, very important. Yet what we tend to focus on are kind of the surface things, because we can see them, they're more tangible, they're easy. If you think about an iceberg analogy. And we talk about succession planning. So people are thinking about all the documents and the structures and the things that you can see above the waterline.
Yeah.
But we also know these days, science tells us that on average, 90% of the iceberg is hidden below the water.
Right.
And that is where we get into, there is I think still to large extent in my world, our world of wealth management, people have begun to understand that, yes, we want to focus on things like succession planning, like having trust in place, like, having limited liability companies, et cetera, on the surface. Below the surface, people have started to think about things like family governance.
Mm-hmm.
How do we help the family decide how to manage all of this? Very important. But below the structures are the relationship system.
Yeah.
I read someplace, Peter Drucker, the quote is attributed to him, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Somebody says he never said that. They can't find it in any of his writings, but it's the concept, is the point.
Right.
Right? You can have the best structures possible, but if people are not going to abide by those structures, it's all for naught.
Right.
I haven't looked at the statistics recently, but when I first got into this work in around 2014-15, probate litigation was one of the fastest growing areas of litigation in the country.
Wow. Yeah.
And people think, oh, I have this trust, everything is great. A trust is just a contract.
Right.
And if a contract was the end all and be all, I wouldn't have made so much money as a lawyer.
Right.
So again, we often, because we are.
Oh, that's such a really key point. You can put all the time into the energy and the documents and whatever, but if it doesn't have the support of the foundational relationship, communication, and it doesn't address the issues that will inevitably come.
Exactly. Exactly. The first challenge becomes, is the person who requested that estate planning even going to sign it? I've had cases where parents got the best legal advice that money can buy and the best wealth advice they could buy. They had these great documents set up and wouldn't sign it. And no one could understand, well, wait a second, you asked us to do this. You paid us to do this.
Yeah.
It was because in the one particular case I'm thinking of, the couple had 3 sons. And the oldest son, and they had a very successful business, the oldest son thought he should be the heir apparent to run the business. But the parents knew he was really not the best one that run this business. Yeah. It was the youngest brother who they wanted to run the business, who they thought had the entrepreneurial acumen, and they didn't know how to have that conversation with their sons.
Right.
Then the daughters-in-law were involved, and it's the relationship stuff. So they asked for the document. They gave the instructions, but it took a while to get to the point. A lot of work had to be done on the people's side before they actually ended up signing the estate planning documents. Yeah, that was some tough conversations. I have a case right now working with the family out in California where the wealth creator left all of these limited partnerships for real estate holdings.
Okay.
Which I'm sure got the best, again, legal advice. Well, this is the best way to protect it from creditors, taxes, et cetera, didn't think about the complexity that creates for the next generation to figure out, how do we manage all of this if dad's not around to help figure it out? So those kinds of things, again, we absolutely positively need to do all of the wealth planning strategies. It's necessary, it's just not sufficient. We've got to think about that people part. I was on a call, like I said earlier, client has 2 children. One, the client has no concerns about just leaving money outright to that child. Another one, I'm sure that's a good idea. So how does the parent navigate the conversation in a way that neither child feels in any way less than? Don't want the one child to feel guilty because they may be getting something the sibling isn't, and the sibling to think, well, wait a second, don't I deserve the same thing? Those are the kinds of conversations that I help families figure out. How do we navigate this in a way that absolutely preserves the financial assets, but recognizes that the most important thing, I say the most precious asset we all have, is who we are, individually and collectively as a family. How do we make sure we preserve that piece? And that requires as much intentionality and strategy and forward thinking as the tax and wealth planning strategies.
I mean, you've given so many good examples, and I can really see how that can help a lot of families. Can you talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts and the process of how you have a new person come to you? And I don't know if it's different depending on their need, but like, can you talk a little bit about just like the nuts and bolts of how you work with families?
Yes, absolutely. So the initial process is very much the same. Again, I think about relationships and think about families as systems. So no matter who comes to me, I mean, we all know that when we're talking about human dynamic, there's at least two sides and probably as many sides to a story as there are people in the family.
For sure.
So for me, it's important to talk to all of the family members. Before I even accept an engagement, I try to talk to multiple people in the family to get some understanding of different people's perspective of what's actually going on here. It's very difficult, honestly, to really know going into a family situation, again, because families are so different, and it's our human nature to see our perspective around what's going on. I generally do engagements in two phases. The first phase is the discovery phase, where I talk to, in one-on-one confidential conversations, individual family members. Sometimes I also talk to family advisors. If the family has a family office or an operating business, depending on what's going on, I may also talk to those folks, because I'm trying to get as holistic, as complete a picture as I can of what's really going on in this system. And then where are the leverage points for making the kind of change that people want to see? And where is the energy for that kind of change? The difference between what I do working with families and what I did as a lawyer is 180 degrees. Seriously, if you have a business dispute with someone, you come into my office, you tell me the problem, we chat, and then it's up to me to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? I'm the person standing up in court making the arguments. I'm the person who's drafted all of the legal documents. It's pretty much on me. Whereas when we're talking about a family and that underlying relationship system, that is the work that the family is best served doing for themselves. So in my part of the wealth management arena, there are some advisors, some consultants who will essentially play messenger between family members. Tell my sister I'm not coming to that meeting. Sorry, I don't do that. I don't carry messages. Because that's not helpful to the family. It might keep me on the payroll for a while. But what I'm trying to do, again, is develop leaders. I'm trying to build capacity within the family to understand, why is there so much discomfort around this particular issue? And then how can we work through that so that the family members can talk to each other, can sit in whatever the discomfort is long enough. I had a work with a family where the CEO's spouse came to the first family meeting, had one other conversation with me, and then she was like, I don't need to be involved in anything else. My husband's going to take care of us. It's his family, his money. I'm good. And it was a very large family. And anytime there was a meeting, I sent her the agenda. There's some kind of report or something after the fact, I'm sending it to her. She's still a part of this family. It was so interesting to me that other family members, frankly, kind of got annoyed with me. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you wasting your time with her? She never participates. She. Well, again, I think each person has agency in the relationship. It's my job to include her. to extend the invitation to her. It's up to her whether she accepts it or not.
Right.
Because she didn't accept it one time, I'm not going to assume she's not wanting to come to the next meeting.
Right.
Fast forward, I'm sitting at my office one day, my cell phone rings. Oh my gosh, it's her. She's calling me. And honestly, I tell you no lie, Meredith, I panicked. I just literally got goosebumps thinking about this. This is how the mind works. I thought, oh my God, is so-and-so okay? My first thought was something had happened to her husband.
Right.
Otherwise, why would she be calling me?
Yeah.
She doesn't want to talk to me.
Right.
It was fascinating. She was calling me because she was upset about a particular circumstance. She wanted to vent about that. And then she wanted me to have a conversation to pass a message on to another family member. And I listened to her because she needed to say what she needed to say. And then I simply said, do you really want to have to call me every time you want to convey a tough message to so-and-so? And she was annoyed. Well, then she went off again. And I said that maybe because we haven't had that many conversations, maybe you're not fully aware of how I operate, but that's not what your family hired me to do.
Right.
Nor candidly, as I said, do I think that's in your family's best interest.
Right.
I don't play messenger, but this is what I will do. I will help you figure out how to say what you want to say in a way that it can be heard.
Yes.
Because if you go in like this conversation, you know that's not gonna get you where you want to go. So what are you trying to accomplish? Who do you need to talk to? Maybe you need to talk to some people and do some things before you have this conversation. Figure out what you want to say. What's the end goal here other than venting? I will even role play the conversation with you. I will sit beside you having the conversation. I'm not going to utter the words. It's not in service of you. So part of what I do, again, is to help families understand, where does that upset come from? Then how do I work through it to the point that I can get to the other side of the discomfort? There are certain default patterns that families that all humans actually tend to fall into.
Right.
And helping people be able to see those patterns and then figure out what can they do to disrupt them rather than leaving that to someone else to do. You have to basically be the change you want to see in your own life.
Right.
It sounds trite, but it's true.
Totally. And based on what you just said, what I'm gathering is before you start working with a family, you talk to all the individual members. And then if you decide to engage with them, then I'm hearing you have family meetings and then you have follow-ups afterwards. Is that a correct understanding of how that process works?
Somewhat. So I have the conversations with individuals to try to put, again, the pieces of the puzzle together as I understand them from all the different perspectives, then share that back with the family so that people spend their time. And I say time is our most precious non-renewable resource. Have enough respect for people to share back with them. This is what I see. This is what I heard. This is what I would recommend as your next step forward.
Okay.
That happens in the context usually of a family meeting where I share what I heard, and there are oftentimes some kinds of exercises or maybe a theme for the day. So the family's getting some kind of family learning of what this might look like in addition to hearing back from me. And then the family decides what the family wants to do going forward. Engagement, because the family stuff is challenging and because I talk about systems and people taking agency and things that honestly most people don't talk to us about. Right. This work is a process and tends to take time. So engagements usually happen over minimum a year, 18 months, 2 years. It just depends. And also everybody's very busy. So just scheduling alone can take some time. Right. And what does the actual work look like? There are always going to be a series of family meetings. There may
would that be all the family members in every meeting, or would they sometimes vary, or you like to have all the members there?
Well, it depends. I was just going to say it may
Oh,
be
sorry.
subgroups. No,
Okay.
subgroups as well. So it depends on what we're trying to do. What's the topic of the
Mm,
meeting? What's the purpose of the meeting?
okay.
Sometimes it's the entire family. I've had meetings with as many as 22, 24 people in the
Wow.
room.
Yeah.
Plus, their advisors might
Right.
be there sometimes, depending on what's
Yeah.
going on.
Right.
Sometimes, maybe if there is, for example, a family foundation, only a couple of people are on the
Mhm.
family foundation board. Maybe it's just those couple of people.
Yeah.
If there is a family operating business, and maybe the question is around preparing the next generation, there
Right.
are a handful of next gen who are working in the family business. Then I'm working with them and non-family officers or executives within that family business. So it
Oh,
just
okay.
depends.
Yeah.
Again, every family, they say if you've seen one family, you've seen one family. So every family is different. Each engagement is tailored to that
Hmm.
specific family and what they're trying to do.
Okay.
Families are also in different life cycles. I've worked with families where the oldest family member is like 82,
Right.
which is very different from a young person who just finished college and what they might need. So it is very much a bespoke kind of work that I do in terms of the engagement. I outline what I think, and then I work with the family, and we figure out what makes the most sense uh, for where we're trying to get to at this point in time.
Is it fair to say it's sort of, and I'm not saying exactly, but it's not exactly therapy, but like it's a little bit about like supporting the emotional relationships of a family, although wealth is by no means the only focus, but like it's sort of what is a catalyst to the kind of support that you provide. Is that fair, or am I not characterizing it properly? Again, not the exact word therapy, because I know that is regulated.
Right. My work is not therapy. My
Okay.
work with people is leadership development. And I
Okay.
firmly believe that the most important person that we each need to lead is ourselves.
Okay.
We tend to think about leadership as positional, as leading other people.
Yeah.
But again, I can't control what it is that you do or say. I can control what I say to you,
Mhm.
how I say it to you, and how I choose to engage with you. So it's really about helping each individual figure out, well, what's my piece of this quandary
Mm,
here? And
right.
how can I work through that is a lot of the work, one-on-one coaching. But
Mhm.
then there are also bigger pieces where individuals need to come together to think about, for example, what kind of family learning might we want to create for our next gen who might be as young as 5 or 6? How do we begin to teach them our values, teach them about money?
Yeah.
So it is, again, it's very much a bespoke work. It is not therapy, though. It is leadership development. The
Yes.
analogy I use is if we were talking about, say, a team in a work context, and maybe someone's having some challenges, whether that person is what we would call a high performer, or they're having challenges where they're not meeting their KPIs, or
Yeah.
maybe there's some conflict between
Yeah. Yeah.
employees, we would not send them to therapy. I mean, think about it.
No, yeah, I think I maybe show my naivete by using that
No,
word.
no, Meredith,
Because I
don't
do see the
apologize.
distinction. I do see the distinction. Yeah.
But that is the how we've been socialized to think about
Mm,
families. We are
right.
all socialized to think, oh, there's something wrong with my family because we're having some
Ooh.
challenges here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We people do it all the time.
That's
I
really
have had
powerful.
clients describe themselves to me as dysfunctional. I was like,
Mm,
no, 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 no. We don't use that language here. That's a D word. That's a dirty word.
yeah,
It's just everybody, frankly, is trying to cope in the best way they know how.
sure. Yeah.
That's how I think about it. And
Yeah.
it's a question of how do I develop my coping
I like
skills
it.
when things get a little too tough here, when there's a lot
Yeah,
of pressure. If
right.
someone is under pressure as an athlete, as a business executive, you get that person a coach. You don't send
Mhm.
that person to
Sure.
therapy. You help
Right.
them improve their performance. And that's how I think about my work with families.
Ah, okay. I like that. It's much better.
All
Um,
we're trying to do is figure out, how do I be in better relationship?
yes. Yes.
Everybody can do that. when it comes to thinking about what can I do myself? How can
Mhm.
I be in a better relationship with my mom, with my dad, with my
Yeah.
siblings, with my spouse, with my children?
Yeah. I also like that positive outlook into in terms of moving forward
Hmm.
and really improving for all, ideally, in terms of developing the skill sets to enable that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the essence of what my work is helping people. Basically, I think about my work as presence, first of all, because I find honestly, in our society in general and in our families, we really aren't listening to each other.
Hmm.
People are talking past each other. People
Mm.
have an agenda. I'm trying to convince
Mhm.
mom to do this or my spouse to do that. And when someone can come and just be witness to who I am, to what I really think and feel without an agenda, without judgment, and then help me think through, okay, how can I get to help me, first of all, sometimes clarify what is my goal, because that's not always clear on our own. And then how do I get there?
Mhm.
That is basically what I see my role as. And more often than not, we think of our choices as either or.
Mhm.
Either I have to win or my sister has to lose.
Mm.
My job is to help people see possibility. There are a
Mhm.
whole lot of ranges.
Oh
I say
yeah,
the reason we
absolutely.
have alphabet from A to Z is there's lots of options there. But when we are in kind of that reactive mode, when we're triggered, when we're upset, when there's emotion, we can't see those possibilities. We
Mhm.
can't see, again, read the label from inside the
Yeah,
jar.
right.
And so it's helpful to have someone else who can see what we can't see and to open our eyes and then help us explore those possibilities and figure out what's the best way forward for me, for my family at this point. And that's kind of how I define my role. Helping people see possibilities, being present to what it is they're trying to do, who they are.
Mm.
Because another challenge I find in families is, particularly when you have prominent families, individuals can get lost in their family lore.
What do you
And
mean?
by that I mean people will see so and so's daughter,
Mhm.
so and so's wife, and not
Oh,
see
I see. Their
me.
identity is within the
Their
context as opposed to
identity.
themselves.
Yes, and a
Ah,
lot of people
sure.
that they're sometimes self-imposed
Hmm.
expectations
Mm.
that I have to do this for my family,
Yeah,
even if my heart really is not in it.
right.
And so, how do we find that space of expressing my individuality, figuring out who I am as a
Mhm.
member of this family, but also separate from this family? I say that
Yeah,
we're as separate as the fingers on the hand, even though we're all connected as family.
you have some
And
excellent metaphors.
it comes with doing the work, I guess. And again, a part of my work as well is I mentioned this earlier in terms of these visual models I sometimes use. And I guess metaphors are visual models. But I really do think about it as helping people figure out, how do I simplify this complexity?
Mm,
How do I figure this stuff out?
right.
And metaphors is a way of helping people see, again, what is possible.
Absolutely. Um, can you share any like tangible, obviously keeping people's personal situations private, with not revealing any kind of personal information, but can you share any success stories you've had in terms of your impact in working with families?
Yes, actually, I can. I had talked with a woman just the other day, last week, who'd sent me a text message over the 4th of July holiday, and she said, my mom and I were just talking about you fondly and
Aw.
how you've helped her to pause,
Mm.
basically, her engagement.
Ooh.
Again, when we're under stress, when we feel like we're not being heard, I say that there are 5 basic uh, underlying needs that people feel are at risk, maybe threatened, as to what
Mm.
causes us to be triggered. When one
Okay.
of those goes off, sometimes we go off and we're not always as pleasant as we would like to be. And so, one of the things I've worked on with this particular client is what I call the power of the pause.
Okay.
This client is a person of deep faith, is
Mhm.
Catholic. And so what she settled on is just to pause long enough to say the first line of the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi.
Mhm.
And that is, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace,
Mhm.
rather than firing back and
Mm.
then the other person snaps and everything spirals out of
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
That is a process that takes time. It's a learned skill.
Right.
It's not only having some sort of strategy like that when you're triggered, but also understanding what is why am I being triggered by this? What is
Mhm.
that underlying deeper need?
Right.
And that was literally just last week that someone commented. And when other people can notice that difference, that is huge.
That is huge. Yeah.
Huge. I had another case I can excite is brother sister. The sister had never worked in the family business.
Mhm.
The brother had only worked in the
Mm.
family, had never worked anyplace else.
Right.
They were like night and day in terms of their political beliefs, where they lived, how they chose to spend their money, I mean, you name it, night and
Wow.
day, and had never ever been close. And they were baby boomers.
Mhm.
And actually, I'm not sure if this one's on my website currently because I've redone the website, but I had a quote from her at one point on the website where she said, we talk all the time now
Oh,
and
wow.
have a relationship that neither of us ever thought was possible
Wow.
until I started working with them. I obviously, again, I didn't do the work. What I did was to help to create a space and a container for them to understand and see each other
Oh,
a little bit
gosh.
differently.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of impacts that I'm able to make for clients. I was at a women's conference once, and I gave a presentation. So I had a videographer team there to take a video for my website. And the client said to me, well, Thomasina, you have these videographers here. What if I just record a testimonial? I was so shocked. I was like, really? Because to me, my client's identity is confidential. I respect my client's privacy.
Sure.
I never would have asked my client to record a video.
Yeah.
At some point, maybe, I would have asked her to put something in writing anonymously. But what she said really touched me. I mean, she said a couple of different times that I was a gift to her family.
Oh, oh
And
man.
in their case, I've been working with the family, and then the husband, the patriarch, unexpectedly died.
Mm.
He passed away. But oh gosh, I got goosebumps just thinking about that. Um, but because of the work that we had been able to do earlier,
Mhm.
the family rallied and was in a place where they thought they could see actually and how they handle that very, very, very difficult situation, because
Yeah.
he died literally suddenly. He had an aneurysm and
Yeah.
never recovered.
Yeah.
They could see how the work that we had done
Oh, wow.
on these underlying
Right.
relationship
Yeah.
challenges, they'd had
Yeah.
time,
That's
frankly. It
fantastic.
was exactly. So that's the kind of work that I do. I say that if, God forbid, the stock market goes to heck in a handbasket tomorrow, if a family is capable and connected, they can rebuild that wealth.
Right.
But I'm sure you know lots of clients who have significant financial wealth, and their relationships with their family members aren't what they would hope that they would be. And
Yeah, I mean,
so
and it does, not always by any means. There's plenty that have, good dynamics, but I mean, definitely the conversations around wealth, if it's whether it's the family or inherited wealth, or it could just be really tricky to navigate because you've got so many things that are influencing the dialogue. Money is a part of it, and it can be the catalyst to the conflict, but there's just so many other pieces that make it's a lot to navigate. It's a lot to navigate.
it is a lot to navigate, and the easier thing to do is to focus on the surface stuff. So again, I like to help people
Yeah,
go
yeah,
deeper, because whatever is happening with the relationship piece is driving what's happening up top. You can
yes.
resolve this initial issue up top. If the relationships aren't solid, that challenge is going to reappear someplace else. It's going to look different. It's like having, pressure build up in a dam.
Right.
And that pressure is going to burst through that dam. You can
Yep.
plug up that hole, but if you
Right.
haven't addressed the pressure, the source of the
Yeah.
pressure,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
dam
Yeah.
is going to break someplace else.
Yeah.
And that's what happens if we don't deal with those underlying relationship challenges.
Wow. Wow. Well, you've got your work cut out for you. I'm sure it's there's lots and lots of people that can benefit from your support. I'd like to, wrap it up here, but do you have any last comments that you'd like to share? Either something that I haven't asked or anything you'd like to emphasize that we've covered already?
I would just emphasize that our relationships, who we are as individuals and as families, I think are our most precious assets. And that we really do, I think, serve ourselves and our families, if you're concerned about your legacy in particular, to be as purposeful in focusing on the family side of the equation as we are in thinking about how we grow and protect our financial assets.
That's beautiful. It really is.